Hey, welcome everybody. This is John Palmadiff, Dr. Speed Selling. This is Raging Verbalist number 292. If you're keeping track, hopefully you are. And Raging Verbalist is something I do every week. Talk about a topic that, well, irks me or pings me or makes me want to just jump up and say, yeah, let's go do something about this and go talk about it. So check us out on YouTube and also on Facebook. Our Facebook group is position2winbook.com, position to win book, which is this the book. This is my book. Most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes. It just takes them 3 to 5 years to realize it. Position to win, and go check that out. Okay, don't deal too much in politics today. I'm talking about technology. And for those of you who have not heard of the news, the news is that AOL, it's American Online, will be ending its dial-up support in just a few weeks, September 30th, 2025, and it is all over. Goodbye, adios, and all of that. Now, I've watched a bunch of YouTube videos talking about it, and usually they are from people who are clearly much younger than I am, and what they miss out on, and they go, well, who the hell is doing dial-up? And what's dial-up? Wham, wham, wham. Well, let's get serious about this. First off, is that AOL has a unique position in the internet world and how it actually popularized the internet itself. And the important thing is that and again, I don't get paid by AOL. AOL has been bought and sold and chopped and diced and sliced and all of that, and we can go into some of those details. But let's talk about what happened. So before the dawn of the internet and the browser and all of that stuff, going online was really for those who were hobbyists or purists or technologists, and you really wanted to go do that. I mean, I remember the first time I bought a modem that was a 1200 baud modem. I mean, don't even think about looking at downloading anything of size because you take a week to do it. So you had to figure out how to get all this stuff connected, and at one point in time, that was virtually impossible. And that meant that only a few of us, and there were lots of different services. So don't think that it was like the Big Bang and then one day, whoosh, it all happened. And that it took some time to figure out how to do all these things. And, there were dial up services. And by the way, those services cost surprising $20 a month. Huh? Where do they come up with that? Where do the AI folks come up with $20 a month? Well, it's because it's a price point that people can go, it's $20. Okay, I'll do that. Now, the thing about it is that they started off where you would go on to these things. And in fact, it was funny because when I started in technology, here I was, driving a customer around, and she was telling me about how her husband got so entranced with this service that he was using. And it was actually, put out by I don't know who, like H&R Block. The tax people had bought into something, and her husband was like printing this stuff out, and she had to stop him because he had like filling up, you know, buying boxes of blank paper and then turning around and printing all this stuff out, which he was never going to read. I mean, he thought, I mean, it was interesting. I understand that. So what happened was that there was this barrier, and anybody who has ever heard me talk about how important the adoption curve is, why they don't teach this in basic business school, I don't know. They brush it over and all of that. They always like to give examples of things that exploded onto the scene as if they actually just exploded on the scene. What they're really doing is they're picking a data point on this bell curve, which is what the adoption curve is. We start with the early adopters and end up with the laggards and haggards in the very end and all of that. Now, the point of it is that AOL was kind of an interesting breakthrough. And what they did is that you would get so many minutes, and they had their own funkified connections. So you would actually log into AOL. You weren't really truly on the internet, but it had the training wheels aspect of it. And by the way, that kicked off like in 1989 is when they rebranded themselves as American Online, and they debuted with a more friendly interface, and it said, "You've got mail." And I remember, getting one of their floppy disks. They didn't even have CDs in 1989. and you got your floppy disks and you put it in, and then you logged in and they wanted a credit card. Talk about scary days, but you gave them a credit card and you were on, and they were, they got their needle into the vein of money and started taking money out, which is why American Online went crazy. And you could then get this thing called the personal email, and you could set out and you could say to people, you can email me. At the time, the number of people who could email you was like tiny, but they went out and did mass mailings because in the 91 to 93, they released versions for DOS and Windows, and they introduced this whole personal email thing, and it started taking off and exploding. Now, that was great because the impact was that they made those early innovations for connectivity. They made it approachable, they made it safe, they made it doing that, and it transformed the computer that you had in your house, right? Because if you look at it, so 93 is like 10 years after, actually 9 years after the Mac was introduced. Now, DOS machines were rolling along, but it was really, all of these, Macs that were coming online. By the way, people thought about installing modems inside of computers, kind of went away from that. Now, by the time you get to the 90s, they're sending out so many different, and they're using snail mail to send out these CDs, and they were placing them in home, and getting them to homes, putting them in magazines, stereo boxes. I remember one of the promos that they had for a magazine is if you bought the magazine for $7, you got 600 free minutes from AOL. I mean, it was a way to get going. And by the way, they used to charge you by the minute, so you'd think about that. And then you had to worry about the phone line charges because, again, we don't live in the times we were. In 97, they introduced this thing called AIM, which is AOL Instant Messenger. It became iconic because people started using it back and forth, and that gave kind of a network effect. In 95, they only had 1 million users, but that was a big deal. But by 99, 4 years later, they had 18 million subscribers, and that meant the world was rolling along. Now, don't think that that's a huge number maybe today, but it was massive then because, again, you had to convince people, what the hell does this thing do anyway? Why do I need it? I used to tell people about this thing called the internet. Now, by that point in time, I was getting tired of AOL. AOL would curate certain things, but really I understood that it was a front end for a much bigger world, because the bigger world out there was the internet. I was working as an evangelist for an MIT startup, and I was watching this internet thing explode, and I was on the hunt for somebody bigger and better than AOL. And it took me a while to get off of AOL. I mean, I don't know if there were 12-step programs, but what I did was I ended up going to Earthlink. Earthlink was an internet service provider. And first thing I thought of is, well, where do I land? Because see, AOL, they made it easy and simple. You landed on their homepage, as we would call it today, and then you kind of dug around and found stuff. But again, it was the limitations. And Earthlink was very cool because they had an affiliate program, which is if you asked for a CD, we're up to CDs now, and you handed it out to somebody and said, hey, here, plug this in, and it went in, they would originally give me 3 months worth of additional free internet. So I was Johnny Appleseed. I was flying around the world, and I was getting lots and lots and lots of CDs from these guys. And then, of course, the brainiacs at Earthlink said, well, wait a second, this guy's getting like, he must be handing them out, on the street. That's exactly what you wanted to do. But of course, they didn't see it that way. They trimmed it from 3 months to 1 month, and eventually they would give you, like, I don't know, some pittance, and I quit handing them out. Didn't mean that it stopped AOL from growing and growing and growing, because by the time we get to the year 2000, AOL merges with Time Warner, which was valued at $360 billion with the B. By 2001, they are the leading ISP, internet service provider. And they have 20 million. And then they dropped the American Online name and began offering free email services, and they changed some things up. And that merger was kind of marking the peak of AOL. Now you're thinking, wait a second, the peak, that was when? Yeah, well, that was like 2006. So, 19 years ago was the peak. Now, what happens is that they end up, you know, AOL and Time Warner split because they realized that these are two very vastly different businesses. The reason why they did it, I think, in the first place, I know if I was the guy in charge of AOL, I know why I would do it. I would do it for a really smart, simple reason, which is, I could go cash out and get a crap load of money. Good on them, right? I mean, that makes sense. And I'm desperately quickly looking for the guy's name. Last name was Case. Smart guy, but again, the world evolved around him, and innovator's dilemma pushed past him, and then they end up breaking and splitting apart. AOL now starts reinventing itself as a media and an ad tech brand because by then, of course, we've got Google rocking along. Then they started doing acquisitions. They got Huffington Post, and other content. And then in 2015, Verizon acquired AOL for 4.4 billion. Must be great being a cell company, and you can just go pick up something like that. Now, in 2017, after 20 years, they closed the instant messenger they had because, again, technology had blown them up. And then, well, broadband and cable really were pushing everything and kind of overtook the dial-up. And for those who don't understand the importance of dial-up, is that was your only way to get onto the internet. Now, today we take it for granted. And for anybody who's under a certain age and has access 5G on your phone, whatever it is, and you're whining about it. Well, all I can tell you is this is going to keep going on and on and on. Keep whining because it's going to keep moving forward. Still, there are parts of the world. I mean, I'm going, when I go to like, a hotel or something. I mean, it's surprising how slow everything is. But well, there you go. Now, the crazy part about it is even through the 2010s, there were millions and millions of dial-up users, and they actually preserved it as a bridge because there were people who didn't want to go out and spend the money for cable and do all that other stuff and move that along. And they said, well, forget about it. And then, well, they were under Verizon's digital umbrella, and they ended up that things were kind of getting a little bit rougher and tougher. I went on to AOL's main page. Now, by the way, anybody who has an AOL email, and there's still lots of people, but it is viewed as somebody who's definitely, you know, in the older camp. There's not a lot of people. Now, frankly, what happens on September 30th is anybody who still has dial-up, you're done. You can't do it. Now, the beauty of dial-up was that you could go anywhere in the world, and if you get a phone line, any kind of dial tone, you could get onto the internet. Kind of thrown away because everybody uses their phone or their tablet, or they use a hotspot or they use Wi-Fi or they use something. But the retirement of it highlights how far internet adoption has come, and that adoption curve has been quite, a massive change. And it lets us look back and say, look, it's been basically 40 years. So since the mid 80s to 2025, and we've advanced a lot. Now, let us not forget, people really should learn history and understand it, I believe, because it makes you better in business and knowing where things come, is that AOL made the internet accessible to everyday Americans. It popularized online communications. It propelled digital literacy. Now its innovations in usability, social interaction, and content distribution laid the groundwork for a lot of the social networks that you enjoy or you use every day in our digital lifestyles. There would be no, you know, digital nomads without this have already happening. And frankly, the end of AOL dial-up is kind of a nostalgic reminder of the internet journey from novelty to necessity, which is where we're at today. We live in a very connected world. And I'll end by saying this, and I've been talking about this now for 15 years, 2010. What happens to your business? What happens to this world when we have ubiquitous, that means everywhere, ubiquitous 1 gig, it's gigabit, by the way. Any idiot who says gigabytes, just go slap them. there's 8 bits in a byte. 1 gigabit bidirectional, unidirectional. You go either way, right? So you don't get stuck with the uploads that are pittance. What happens when that happens all over the place, and what does that change our world? And it will. Are we going to get there today? No. Will we get there in the next 10 years? Maybe. I have a business partner who happens to live in kind of a remote part of Washington State, and he has his service from his cable provider is, believe it or not, 10 megabits, 10 megabits, not gigabits, 10 megabits per second up. I mean, excuse me, down, and 2.5 up. And if you think that your life is slow, boy, is that better than dial-up? Sure it is. It's way faster, much faster than dial-up. But the reality of it is that that's where we are today. We are on a continuous upward trajectory, and hopefully we will continue to see these breakthroughs, which will in fact change things. It will change the nature of work and change the nature of what you're going to do or not do. So take this moment, give maybe a point of quiet reflection, but September 30th is the end of dial-up for AOL, which will be the end of dial-up really for everybody as we move forward in our internet journey. Now, I ask you to hit this with a like, give me a big thumbs up, please. Also, if you want to subscribe, would appreciate it, love it. And, if you want to be annoyed, hit the notifications. And with that, I'm John Paul Mendoza, Dr. Speed Selling. This has been Raging Verbalist 292. Go out and have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you on the next Raging Verbalist.